Welcome to the Minitex webinar series, Engaging with Critical Cataloging, Past and Present. This webinar is being recorded today, and welcome all. This webinar series is an exploration of Library of Congress subject headings and the authority work that goes into getting those headings ready. You are going to hear about this work from the perspective of critical catalogers who are engaged in this work today, and you'll learn about important historic projects and people from Minnesota's radical cataloging history. This series is trying to find the connections between past and present as we learn about Library of Congress subject authority work. Jaylene Telford, Amy Gabbert-Montag, and Charlotte Kadifa are current and recent graduates from the St. Kate's Masters of Library and Information Science program. This group is going to share insights from their graduate project called Voices of the Catalog, a digital and oral history of Hennepin County catalogers. This digitization and oral history project focused on the Hennepin County Library Technical Services Department from 1973 to 1999. And during this time period, head cataloger Sandy Berman and his team disseminated their cataloging work through the Hennepin County Library Cataloging Bulletins. And this publication is now digitized in full thanks to the hard work of this group. All the images you see in this presentation, unless otherwise noted, are from the Hennepin County Library Cataloging Bulletin. And interviews with Hennepin County Library staff were also conducted. And we'll learn about creativity in cataloging, fostering a healthy work environment, and cultivating community from these Voices of the Catalog interviews. And without further ado, I'll pass it along to our presenters.
I think it's important that this not be forgotten in library history.
You just heard Bob Epstein, former library and cataloger, during his interview with Voices of the Catalog. We wanted to open with this quote because it emphasizes the core of this project, which is about engaging with library history. Again, we just want to thank everybody for joining, and we're going to provide a brief overview for those who are unfamiliar with Hennepin County Bulletins. So the Hennepin County Bulletins began as an internal memo that was sent around the cataloging department at Hennepin County, and it eventually turned into an international publication. It was published from 1973 until 1999, and it included lists of subject heading additions and revisions, as well as feedback, criticism, illustrations, and conversation about cataloging. The topics really ranged from the mundane to the more serious, yet the librarians often wrote with sensitivity and humor. And this was noted by Cheryl Sheeta. Her quote is on the slide, and it reads, "Mercy for Hennepin County 6 through 7, it was extremely thought-provoking, and unlike so many other journals, full of humor and social consciousness. Each new issue gives us courage in the face of tremendous odds." The Hennepin County Bulletin reflected the attitude of librarians who were seeking to improve access to the catalog and improve public services, all while adapting to societal changes. The Bulletin was not just a print publication, it was a collaborative forum. Libraries well beyond Hennepin County and Minnesota benefited from this outlet. It promoted idea sharing, concern for the community needs, and really inspired library leadership. So our project had two elements. The digitization process primarily focused on the Hennepin County Bulletins, as well as some other supplementary materials. Ultimately, we digitized all 163 issues of the Cataloging Bulletin, which is just under 6,000 pages. We also digitized the supplementary items, around 250 pages of working files, including letters, newspaper clippings, brochures, and photographs. The second part and the ongoing part of our project is speaking with the librarians and staff members to learn about their stories and how they helped create the Hennepin County bulletins and how they contributed to the catalog. And today's presentation is going to focus quite a bit on that. You might be wondering kind of how we became started with this project. And the overall process of creating voices of the catalog itself could be its own presentation because there's a lot that goes into this. We're not really going to get into it, but to just rattle off some things, we had to navigate copyright. We had to determine multiple storage locations for materials. We had to figure out equipment and how to calibrate it for scanning. We also had to determine how to do audio recording and audio editing, as well as figuring out software. All three of us use something different for that. We also learned about best practices for accessibility, drafting consent forms, interviewing techniques, and so much more. But we're really not going to get into the nitty-gritty of that. We are going to be focusing on the people who participated in the interviews and what they had to share. So throughout this presentation, you will be hearing quotes, or we'll be sharing quotes from individuals on this slide. There's also some photos as well of the people who have participated. This project was really made possible because of the encouragement of the library community. This is a bit of a rough timeline of how it all happened. So we were all studying at St. Kate's, and we learned that cataloging is one of the most public things that you can do. It is often that welcome mat, or that first point of contact when a patron comes to visit your website and they're looking for something. And this position was really embodied by David Lesniewski. He presented at MLA in 2023. And his presentation, which you can learn about in an upcoming webinar, was really about replicating the original catalog of Hennepin County into Koha and talking about the utility of the catalog under Sandy Berman's leadership. So his presentation was met with so much enthusiasm, and that's really where our project began. We learned about the technical aspects of the catalog, but it was obvious there was this very human element that could be explored more. So wanting to learn about how the team was able to be so effective and recognizing that what they did was very unique, we decided we should document their experiences. As graduate students, we also wanted to engage with library history and put into practice some of the skills that we were learning in school. So we did our research, we tried not to reinvent the wheel, and throughout that process, we saw the great work of other individuals and how they were engaging in library history. And we were inspired by the Catalogers at Work project, the Trans Oral History project, as well as the State Law Library for the oral history projects that they have done. However, it's the people that we've been interviewing that have gone unrecognized for so long that have really inspired us.
So a main goal of our project was to shine a light on the cataloging team and away from Sandy. Everyone in the library profession knows who Sandy Berman is, but do they know who Lynn Stetler or Jan Desiri or Heather Clark are? But it's really important that we address the myth of Sandy versus the reality. So what is the myth of Sandy? It's that he single-handedly created an inclusive catalog and was the sole driving force behind local and national changes. This is connected to the ideas of the great man theory and the lone genius idea, which we see all the time in history, art, pop culture, and politics. These ideas state that one person, almost always one man, created a masterpiece and only one person should be credited for it. We are currently seeing some pushback against these ideas, but they are still entrenched in our society. The work of the cataloging department was a shared endeavor. It was not Sandy Berman who dictated what terms should be used or how the catalogers should do their jobs. Sandy had the vision, which was focused on usability, equity, access, and doing what is right. Sandy says he is not radical, he's just doing the right thing. It was all about creating conversations and being able to show receipts, if you will. The catalogers had to justify every proposal they made to the group, whether it was as simple as a new cross-reference or a new or revised subject heading. Literary warrant was very important, and the catalogers had to have solid justification for the changes they were making. According to Sandy, a good catalog is one that is precise and accurate. However, in every interview that we've had, his name inevitably comes up and always in glowing terms. His leadership was clearly impactful on the catalogers. There is just no way there's no getting away from Sandy Berman. So here are a few quotes that highlight this. From Chris Dodge, "It was all very collegial. He was not dictatorial, and we pretty much decided together." From Gretchen Ronka, "Sanford is a great person for consulting with everyone. He wasn't just focused on cataloging, but the whole collection." And from Jan Desiri, "I can just say that working with Sandy was really a trip. They were just, really interesting, different people from all kinds of backgrounds. It was a very collaborative environment." While Sandy created the supportive work environment, there were elements that were already in place at HCL that allowed the catalogers' work to be done.
Okay, so let's talk a bit about the external factors that allowed the Hennepin County Library catalogers to innovate and publish their work. HCL was able to make changes locally due to the technology they had, administrative support, funding, and strong leadership. And, not every institution has any of these elements, much less all of them. So let's contextualize the technological changes that were occurring at the time and the specific machines that enabled them to actually do their cataloging and then publish their changes to the world. So the cataloging software and access they had access to was courtesy of Mitch Friedman. Mitch became the technical services director at HCL in 1969. One of his big projects when starting this role was to update the library cataloging technology, which meant transforming the current card catalog to a printed book catalog and increase automation. What happens next is what Mitch calls a piece of library automation history. A team of researchers at the Institute of Library Research at the University of California had cataloging software that processed existing MARC records from the card catalog format into a format suitable for a printed book catalog. So that was the first step in making changes to MARC records in a far easier way than was previously possible at the time. And Mitch secured that software for Hennepin County. But they still needed software that could tweak MARC records with ease. And that came from the New York Public Library, a Rolls-Royce system, according to Mitch. That's because the system had a module which enabled catalogers authority control, meaning that they could correct an authority record, and that change would be reflected in thousands of bibliographic records if necessary. So any bibliographic record with that authority record would be automatically changed. And this was brand new technology at the time. In his oral history interview, Mitch said that this software is, quote, fundamental to the success of Hennepin, and you wouldn't be talking to me now because there wouldn't be the changes to the catalog that were possible. So Mitch had the catalogers using IBM MTST, or magnetic tape selectric typewriter. You may be asking yourself, what on earth is a magnetic tape selectric typewriter? There is a photo of it on this slide here. And it is essentially a type of typewriter, and that could edit documents without having to retype the entire thing. So it worked by what you typed on the typewriter here would go onto a tape, and those tapes could be replayed, corrected, and reprinted as many times as needed, and could actually be reused as well. So those tapes were sent off to New York Public Library, where they were printed into a book format and then sent back to Hennepin County. The new book catalog at HCL also stands out because of its accuracy. And that was because Mitch hired graduate students in the library program at the University of Minnesota to proofread catalogs. Catalogs at the time were known for being for having a lot of errors in them. And this really meticulous and underappreciated work greatly benefited reference librarians and users. It saved them a ton of time and frustration. So that's the technology that the team had access to actually do their cataloging. But what is really crucial to their success lies in the sharing of their work. So we'll talk next about the role of Xeroxing technology in disseminating the bulletins. In Adjusted Margins, Xerography, Art, and Activism by Kate Eichhorn. Yes, there is an entire book dedicated to copy machines, and I did in fact read the entire thing. In this book, the author discusses how the humble copy machine enabled far easier distribution of grassroots and alternative textual material. She states that the copy machine became an integral cog in another type of machine, a self-regulating, highly dispersed, worker-driven engine turning out myriad critical responses to contemporary public issues. In other words, with the advent of the Xerox machine, the modes of production went from the few to the many. Publishing your own work became way easier and cheaper. Sandy in particular was a big fan of the Xerox machine, and he used it to send out not only the bulletins, but other various sources, library literature. He sent this to colleagues, friends all over the country and even the world. So this example of how Hennepin County catalogers harness the power of technology to create change contains lessons that apply to today's technology in terms of how we can catalog and how to discuss our work. There are communities of like-minded professionals who are coming together via social media and other internet-based platforms to discuss best practices in cataloging. And likewise, this was done in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, but it was via publications created through cheap modes of production, courtesy of the Xerox machine and snail mail. And so obviously that slows things down a little bit, but was still really powerful. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about that administrative support that they had at Hennepin County. Mitch Friedman, who was the former technical services director who brought in that automation software, his role was part of the administration, but he was heavily invested in the success of the catalog. He hired Sandy, who at this point had published Prejudices and Antipathies. Sandy Berman was hired by Hennepin County in 1973. Prejudices and Antipathies was published in 1971. And that book was criticized Library of Congress subject headings. So Mitch was familiar with Sandy's work and his position on cataloging, and he saw that as an asset rather than a liability. And not only that, but Mitch fought for a higher salary for Sandy when he was hired. Mitch thought that what Sandy was asking for was way too low, and he gave him more money for his work. The administration wing of the institution in the beginning of the bulletins, more broadly than just Mitch, was also supportive, and that really is a vital asset, and it made it possible through the catalogers to publish their work under the umbrella of the county library system. This isn't to say, of course, that the catalogers never had their battles with management. And there were certainly times when administrators and catalogers disagreed fiercely on some topics. But in the early days in particular, there was a general agreement between the two factions on the goals of the catalog. Hennepin County Library was also really fortunate to have sufficient funding, and that played a key role in their success. Each of our narrators that we interviewed cited the crucial and unfortunately unusual funding benefits at their library. Residents of Hennepin County were willing and happy to support the library with their tax dollars, and that paid for all the software and other technologies as well as personnel.
We also want to add to the context that during the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, it was a time of counterculture. There was profound societal change, and Hennepin County Library was really riding that change. It was evident in both the technology that was used, as Amy described, but it was also evident in how the catalogers would source their knowledge and their materials to justify their work. And this is really notable in the use of alternative publications and less conventional sources of information. So when you go to view the Hennepin County bulletins, you will also see where they are quoting and listing out why they were making the changes and where that change was kind of originating from. And this could really range. It was things like the British Alternative Press Index, it was Penthouse Magazine, the Black Students Guide to Colleges, as well as things like Rolling Stones. All of this also contributed a lot to the kind of pop culture knowledge that the librarians themselves had. They also drew on a lot of materials that reflected technological changes, like the thesaurus of engineering and scientific terms. It should also be noted that many of the staff were either participating in these countercultural movements or they weren't shying away from it. In fact, some of the librarians that we interviewed, they had actually left libraries previously where they had been discouraged or outright rejected for their ideas, their values, their lifestyles. And it's at Hennepin County Library that they found a more supportive environment, one that really encouraged critical thinking and in many cases did align with the broader societal movements of the time. Additionally, several of the staff members were directly involved in national efforts for change, things like the ALA's 1970 Task Force on Gay Liberation. And it's these same societal shifts that were shaping the catalog. They were also influencing management theory, which led to the eventual integration of countercultural ideas into mainstream business practices by the 1980s and 1990s. Concepts such as knowledge work, social responsibility, decentralized organizational structures, and empathetic leadership, the things that we now accept today as standard elements of management.
So when you consider management theory and history, the cataloging environment at Hennepin County Library was really ahead of their time. Through their policies and practices, they created a sense of psychological safety, which is a term many of us are likely familiar with, but it wasn't coined until the 1990s. Psychological safety, as defined by the American Psychological Association, is a work environment in which members of a team can be themselves and they share the belief that they can take appropriate risks and they can and should admit and discuss mistakes, openly address problems and tough issues, seek help and feedback, and trust that no one on the team is out to get them, and trust that they are a valued member of the team. So let's hear from the catalogers about their work environment and see if it matches this definition of psychological safety. Chris Dodge said, quote, "I learned from, as we all did, from Sandy, and then we started learning from each other. I was fortunate to work with Stanford and the people that I worked with." Jan Desiri said that, quote, "It was a creative place to work, and we had a lot of leeway in suggesting subject headings, and a new topic would come up and nothing would point to it that made any sense. And so you take it over to Sandy and say, this book is about whatever, and what do you think about a new subject heading for this? And then a discussion ensued, and Sandy encouraged literature to back up their suggestions, that literary warrant that we have mentioned earlier. One example from Heather Clark that you can see here on the slide, this was a sheet of paper that she presented to Sandy with some suggestions she had for cross-reference additions. And so you can see she wrote, "Do you care? Does anybody care?" And you see Sandy's response written in this thick black marker with his sort of signature scrawling handwriting that says, "Yeah, I care." Lynn Stetler told me about the meetings the cataloging team had, saying, yeah, we used to have like sometimes 2.5-hour meetings where we would just argue back and forth at the table. Other narrators had really similar stories. And, you know, they talked about conversations occasionally got heated, but it didn't devolve to the point where, you know, relationships deteriorated or things got really uncomfortable. So these stories show that Sandy really created a psychologically safe workplace where the catalogers could try new things and make mistakes freely. Innovation was welcome and encouraged, and the bulletins and the catalog that they created wouldn't be possible without a safe place to grow and try out new things. The psychological safety can likely be attributed to Sandy's preferred style of leadership, which was participatory. This is another term and concept that really wasn't firmly established until the 80s and 90s, but was being practiced in the 70s. One example of this that I find really telling is that the exact word collegial or collegiality was used by each of the catalogers that I spoke with. And you can see on the slide here, these are excerpts from their transcripts where they all use that word collegial to describe the work environment that they were in. And I think that's really telling about the kind of team-based approach that the catalogers had. One other example is here. This comes from the working notes that we digitized that were in the Hennepin County Library archives. We found several examples like the one that you see here. Sandy, whose message is the typewritten section there at the top, he is asking for feedback on changing the subject heading phonodisc. Before a change like this was enacted, the whole team had a chance to give their opinion about the changes. This also kind of illustrates that the team drove the updates. Going back to the myth of Sandy, Sandy didn't make all the changes related to subject headings. It was a really team-based approach. So you can see from these few examples that Sandy, rather than enforcing the hierarchical structure of the library, highlighted teamwork and focused on developing functional and supportive teams.
It was understood by the catalogers that they were not to just sit at their desk, completely disengaged from their colleagues and from the patrons of the library. Cataloging wasn't done at the desk. It was done in the real world. So they were encouraged to engage with the community, whether that was going out to see a movie or see a play, to listen to music, and to have conversations with people just out and about, because those moments and those skills would ultimately enrich cataloging. So the team of catalogers worked closely with the reference librarians to determine if the changes they were making on their end were ultimately helpful for their colleagues and the patrons. Several of the catalogers also worked in public services, and that cross-training informed how they did their cataloging. So several of our narrators told stories about actively seeking out the reference staff or having the reference staff come to them. They would also get phone calls down to their desk, and public librarians were saying, hey, I need to find this book. I can't find it in the catalog. I don't even know if the title's correct. And the catalogers had a very deep knowledge of the overall collection, especially when it came to book series, and they were able to point their colleagues in the correct direction. They also would often include misspellings or misunderstood titles of materials. That was based on feedback from the reference librarians coming and saying, everyone's trying to find Antarctica, but they misspell it. Can you put the misspelling in the catalog? Because that's how people are going to find it. Sandy would also encourage the catalogers to go on little reconnaissance missions. So Bob Epstein recalled how his coworker Larry was sometime in the 90s sent up to talk to patrons and do informal interviews and ask them about abbreviations. Do you know this abbreviation? What's this abbreviation for? And how they could then take that information and incorporate it into the catalog to make it more user-friendly. So ultimately, engaging with patrons in this manner happened because the cataloging team was very user-centered and community-focused.
Encouraged by higher management, many catalogers and librarians were involved in the Minnesota Library Association, the American Library Association, and other boards and topic-based roundtables, like the Social Responsibilities Roundtable. They were able to spread the ideas expressed in the cataloging bulletins through these memberships. The bulletins also became a forum for people to submit letters of support or criticism or discuss cataloging-related topics. Letters exclaiming joy in receiving their newest editions of the bulletin show how important the bulletins were to librarians and catalogers outside of Hennepin County and the state of Minnesota. Readers would write in commiserating about unsupportive management, difficulty trying to update systems, and the hesitancy of the Library of Congress to change their subject headings. Readers would also write in with their opinions on topics or questions that were proposed in previous editions of the bulletin. The catalogers felt like they were making a difference in the field of cataloging. Former cataloger Heather Clark stated, "When I worked for Sandy, I felt like I was really doing something. I was making a better world. We all knew that we worked for public service and that our main goal was to make things accessible, and that the whole point of cataloging is to make it so people can find what they're looking for. That's the whole point." One thing that struck us as we paged through the bulletins was back in the 1970s, they were discussing the radical idea of asking folks, particularly marginalized communities, how they would like to be described. The catalogers acknowledged that they were and are not the ultimate authority on language. It is the community members who are. While there are many examples of speaking with the actual communities through the bulletins, including but not limited to the disabled people and the LGBTQ+ community, we wanted to highlight one example here, the discussion of Native peoples. According to Bob Epstein, there was a long period where Sandy had discussions with local Native American tribes. What do you call yourselves? Which is more appropriate? Native Americans, American Indians, First Nations? Sandy and the catalogers would use multiple resources to justify the creation of the subject heading. These two examples on the slide, which are explicitly engaging with Native communities, are from some of the first bulletins in 1973 and 1974. Again, it has only just become widely accepted. We need to consult and work with marginalized communities in order to better understand what they need from the library community and what the library community needs to do to make them feel accepted. According to Bob, these ideas and approaches have been around for many decades. I think the difference now is that the discussion is happening more broadly. We do want to clarify that the work of Hennepin County was not happening in isolation. Similar efforts were taking place at the time, as demonstrated by the Chicano thesaurus and the Brian Deere classification system. However, Hennepin County was doing their work at a much larger scale. It's not that people didn't want to do this work. Hennepin County just had the perfect combination of resources and institutional support to dedicate so much time, effort, and money towards this work.
Well, Charlotte has mentioned some of the more serious discussions that were taking place in the bulletins and at the library. We want to talk about having fun. Creativity is what allowed the Hennepin County Bulletins to be a sustainable and meaningful publication. It's quite evident in the illustrations, many of which are done by Jackie Urbanovich, the children's book author and illustrator. And it's also evident in the discussions that are featured throughout the bulletins. However, the bulletins don't fully capture the level of creativity and its direct impact for the staff and patrons. When we first met Lynn Stetler, she told us there was so much creativity in what we did. And this concept of creativity came up again and again and again. To share some quotes, Lynn said, "We had fun doing it, and I think that's what kept everybody together because we liked it. And a lot of it was just the sheer idea that you could have creativity in cataloging." And Chris Dodge said, "I feel there is a joy, a way in being creative and feeling a sense of mission or helping and being useful, helping people, helping share the joy." And Jan said, "It was a very creative place to work. It was really fun to be able to take public requests and transfer them back to cataloging and have changes made." And Heather Clark, when trying to recall different subject headings for children, joked, "Did I just make this up, or was it really a subject heading? I did find cooking with children, but fishing for children, maybe we just joked that it would be a good heading." So the creativity in the catalog directly improved their AV cataloging, their patron services, and it had a remarkable impact on children's services. Many of the librarians spoke about adding fictional characters such as Obi-Wan Kenobi or professional wrestlers and other characters that children were just interested in. And the cataloging changes also had a direct benefit for parents or caregivers who were looking for resources about life events that were being experienced by their children, by their family. Jan Desiri, when discussing children's subject headings, shared how frantic parents trying to find books resulted in the subject headings such as a new baby in the family or the first day of school.
While the wider cataloging community greatly appreciated and benefited from the creativity and the humor in the work the catalogers did, some felt their irreverent and radical approach went too far. At the height of its popularity, a decision was made by higher-up administrators that the bulletins could no longer publish essays or feedback. In 1979, following Bulletin 40, Sandy was removed as editor, and the bulletin ceased to be a place for comment, debate, and cartoons. This was difficult for the subscribers, as seen in this letter from Jean. "Just a note to say that I'm sorry to hear that you will no longer be editing the bulletin, and that it will now revert to being an authority file only. I read, or at least peruse, all the major library journals, and yours is one of the very few which I pick up with enthusiasm." From Bulletin 41 onwards, it remained a valuable asset for subscribers to see what changes the Hennepin County catalogers were making, but it lacked the humor, creativity, and flair it previously had. And then in 1999, Sandy was infamously forced to resign his position as head cataloger, and the Bulletin's final issue was November-December 1999, issue 163. This departure devastated the cataloging team, as expressed in these quotes from Heather, Jan, and Lynn. Individuals moved to other departments or left HCL altogether. The team shrank, and there was a drop in enthusiasm. The catalog that was so carefully crafted was all but destroyed by the move to OCLC and standardized copy cataloging. This massive shift in their very practice of cataloging meant no more humor, creativity, or long arguments over vocabulary, and limited their engagement with the wider library community. It is difficult to articulate how much of a blow this was to the catalogers because their work was their lives. By recording the histories of these catalogers and reference librarians, these stories remain.
So thankfully, their work is still here for us to learn from, which was part of the reason we took on this project. Just as the HCL team built off of the work of previous librarians, currently practicing professionals are building and creating improved access for library materials using more precise, accessible, and less offensive language. We can continue to learn from their example, whether we are trying to catalog, implement new forms of leadership, or build community and relationships with patrons. We started this presentation with a quote from Bob Epstein, so let's end with one too.
I think, it's important that people understand why some of the changes that have come around or appeared in RDA were, at least in part, a result of the efforts of Sandy Berman and his team of catalogers over the years.
Well, thank you for listening to our presentation. We have here, if you're interested in learning more about the bulletins, which are on HCL's digital collections page, the working notes and oral histories are forthcoming. But if you'd like to learn more, you can check out our website here. So thank you for listening, and we look forward to any questions or comments you might have.
Okay, audience. Alyssa Becknell back here from the beginning. Now is your chance to ask questions. You can type them in the chat. You could raise your hand, or if you want to unmute yourself and ask, that's welcome too. So in the chat, I see that Cassian asked, will the slides be made available? And the answer is yes, they will be made available. At the end, I'm going to do an accessibility check on these, and I will also be captioning this recording, and both will be made available to anyone who registered for the event. You'll be notified. And then Tina Gross has a recent statement from Sandy Berman that the audience might appreciate. So if you want to click on that link, you can go ahead and do that. Thank you, Tina, for sharing that. Okay, I'm going to grab some of these chat questions. So from Emily, I'd love to know how many of the subjects that the team at Hennepin County created have become Library of Congress subject headings or influence Library of Congress subject headings. I have seen Hennepin in notes in authority records. Is that information available anywhere?
Yeah, so a little bit we can speak to that is Sandy does have a scorecard. I believe it's on his website, if that's correct. Yeah, his scorecard that of all of the revisions, additions, or subtractions he has proposed to Library of Congress. I believe it's more or less updated. It's on his website.
Yes, and there have been some articles about it too over the years. Nothing recent. I think the last retrospective was 2000s, like 2010-ish. And then next question from Amy. How familiar were you researchers with the technological changes, the IBM Selector and Xerox, and those technological changes, their influence before you started this research?
I would say pretty much zero.
I would agree.
Zero. Pretty much zero, and it's still, oh, I'm so sorry. I don't know if you can hear the siren, but yeah, and there's still a lot that is a little difficult for me to understand, but it was very evident that those technological changes played a huge role in the catalog.
Yeah, and I think technology has been driving a lot of the changes in cataloging practice and in the way catalogs and authority files are managed. I mean, in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s, in the aughts, it is driving, and it's cool that you folks went into a little bit of that history. Okay, and thank you, Margaret. Margaret gave us a nice subject heading for what's happening right now, emergency drills in Minnesota. And then Amy asked, or Amy has a comment. I asked because I lived through these changes and I thought it seemed unfamiliar to your folks. I remember taking a card from a card catalog and typing the contents into a computer with a blank screen using green text and just laughing.
Yeah,
And
that was
yeah,
something that was mentioned when I talked to Gretchen. She's like, we had a book catalog, which seemed so cool and innovative at the time. Not anymore.
yes. And thank you for all the humor that's in the chat about our severe weather drills that are going on presently during our Q&A. We appreciate your ability to just go with it. I think I'll just do one more call if anyone has any questions they'd like answered or another comment to share. And I hope that our presenters are seeing all the gratitude that people are expressing in our chat right now. If there are no more questions, then I will let folks go. When I send out the recording and the links to the slides, I will also be sending out a satisfaction survey, so you can go ahead and share your feedback there, or even right now, if you want to use that QR code to get to the survey. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to grab this link. And there's the survey link right there. You can go ahead and take a survey. And then later this spring, there will be more webinars in this series. And so we still have 3 more webinars where you can learn more about subject headings. You can learn more about Minnesota history and cataloging work. And you can even learn how to get involved in critical cataloging that's going on today. So thank you all for coming. And we hope you have a wonderful and safe afternoon. Thank you so much.